This 11-year-old girl transitions by age 15, and at age 23 considers her permanently masculized voice, her 5 o'clock shadow, her missing breasts, and her infertility to be wrongful. We know her damaged body can't be repaired, but under the amended bill, the legislature will have provided her a way to pursue financial compensation through the court system until she turns age 38. This amended bill avoids criminalizing doctors. It avoids involving the state in the doctor-patient relationship, and it does not affect parental rights.
My name is Scott Nugent. I'm a 47-year-old transgender man from Dallas, Texas. So far, my insurance and myself has been billed just under $1 million to transition medically. And of course, I'll be dependent upon drugs and doctors for the rest of my life. First, let me explain why I'm calling in. Adult transgender in the majority are closeted, and we live a very normal life without being judged. But I could not do that, having 3 kids at the age they are transitioning kids now. I also have 100 medically transitioned adults that are standing behind me with a signed petition that are also against medical transitioning children. During my process, I've had many medical complications, some of them life-threatening. If you investigate medical transitioning, you will soon discover that complications are kind of glossed over as if you're changing your clothes, and it's certainly not the case. In 2017, I had a phalloplasty with Dr. Curtis Crane, who's considered the world-renowned top transgender surgeon. I went 17 months with a reoccurring bacteria infection that doctors couldn't fix or didn't want to fix. After seeking 8 different attorneys who initially took my case, they all decided not to take the case to court. And the reason why was, the last attorney told me, is that there are no baseline for transgender health. So to take a case like this, they would have to create that baseline, and that would be millions and millions in dollars. Unfortunately, though it was a cut and dry medical malpractice case, he couldn't take it because he couldn't spend that money to create a baseline for service. Changes I went under emotionally, physically, spiritually should never be offered to minors. I'm here to talk to you as a transgender man on behalf of myself and the 100 other transgender adults that also believe medically transitioning kids is wrong. You may hear the opposition say that not allowing kids to get puberty blockers and opposite birth hormones will increase suicide, but it's actually the opposite. When these kids are medically transitioned, hit 25, and they realize they are locked into the medical system for life, that this was a phase that a lot of preteens go through. They cannot have biological. They have early onset osteoporosis and surgeries that left their body damaged. They'll be thinking of this while they're wearing diapers for life. This is when we will see a true suicide epidemic.
There's only 2 sexes, and it's not scientifically possible to turn a boy into a woman or a girl into a man. Yet this is exactly what's being attempted in an experimental, dangerous protocol called affirmative care. First note, this is not standard of care. From the Endocrine Society guidelines, the disclaimer states they do not establish a standard of care. Does a controlled study exist that compares, say, kids on puberty blockers to those not on blockers? This would be helpful to know, right? No such study exists. Instead, there are activist researchers doing this sort of study, performing mastectomies on 13 and 14 and 15-year-old girls. These girls can never get functioning breasts back. Now, this same group also lowered the age for girls getting testosterone down to 8 years old. Can you imagine an 8-year-old girl getting testosterone? Is this the type of activist science that you want to depend to make your decisions? You wouldn't trust cigarette manufacturers to give you health information on cigarettes. Why trust activists to give you true information on these harmful hormones? Bad science brings harms to people. 23-year-old Cara Bell received experimental treatments, including puberty blockers, and is part of a lawsuit right now against the UK's Gender Service. She says this: hormones and surgery should not be offered to someone under 18. The treatment urgently needs to change so young people like me are not put on a torturous path that is permanent. Serious doubts are being published in medical journals worldwide. Puberty blockers have been called a momentous step in the dark. Worldwide calls for and investigations are occurring in Sweden, the UK, Australia, and Brazil right now. You have to understand, puberty blocking medications given at the time of puberty, normal puberty, cause a disease state because they're freezing normal development. This is different than precocious premature puberty. Harms include sexual dysfunction, infertility, osteoporosis risk. A key period of bone and brain development is lost forever by doing this. In a study of kids on puberty blockers, all 70 of those kids decided to go onto cross-sex hormones. They didn't pause and wait, they went onto it. And most of them had gender-changing surgeries. Testosterone is being used on girls at super high doses, 10 to 40 times above the normal female level. Side effects include hypertension, cancer risk, permanent lowering of the voice. Males on estrogen have 5 times risk of deadly blood clots, increased risk of stroke, male breast cancer. For both sexes, there's an increased risk of heart attack and death from cardiovascular disease. These hormones are a pathway to sterilization. Surgeries for males include dissecting the penis and placing it into a pelvic wound, removal of the testicles. For girls, removal of the skin of the forearm and then rolled up to look like a penis, and then ovary removal. Surgical complications, you've heard some already: serious infection, chronic pain, urethral strictures, and even death. There are no rigorous long-term studies that show that these hormonal and surgical procedures that I've talked about have any beneficial effect. But what we do know is that 85% or more of young children who suffer from gender confusion, if simply supported through normal puberty, will ultimately embrace their own bodies.
When normal puberty is arrested, valuable time is forever stolen from these children. Time that should be spent in normal development. This time period, during which significant advances in bone, brain, and sexual development occur, is time and development that can never be given back. According to a recent Kaiser Health News report, many young women treated with Lupron as children are now suffering from lifelong osteoporosis, anxiety, and even seizures. Among young men treated with Lupron as children, there is evidence of an increased risk of testicular cancer.
I am here today primarily to address the unsupported assertion that House Bill 1057 is unconstitutional. This modest bill would create a civil cause of action for young people who end up regretting their childhood decision to undergo medically unnecessary and harmful medical procedures that can result in permanent sterilization. Similar bills have been filed in Florida, Colorado, Missouri, Oklahoma, South Carolina, and Kentucky. Litigation appears to be likely in one or more of these states if one of these bills passes, though it is not at all clear that such litigation would necessarily arise in South Dakota. The ACLU of South Dakota has proclaimed that it is unconstitutional to single out one group of people and categorically ban all care, no matter how medically necessary. But it is not at all obvious why this bill might be unconstitutional. If the ACLU is relying on the 14th Amendment's Equal Protection Clause for its assertion that the bill is unconstitutional, this would be flawed. Equal protection analysis involves a complicated legal examination of what degree of scrutiny should apply to a particular individual or group's claim regarding discrimination. Crucially, however, this presupposes the existence of a definable class of persons. As Wolf has repeatedly argued, transgender identity is not a class of people that has been defined in any meaningful or non-circular way. Even more importantly, the court's statement in a case called Reed versus Reed, where it first recognized the importance of protecting the characteristic of sex under the Equal Protection Clause, that this court has consistently recognized that the 14th Amendment does not deny to states the power to treat different classes of persons in different ways, gives the lie to the ACLU's vague and unsupported claim that this bill is unconstitutional. Finally, the Supreme Court has said that many of the rights and liberties protected by the Due Process Clause sound in personal autonomy does not warrant the sweeping conclusion that any and all important, intimate, and personal decisions are so protected. There is simply no reason to believe at this time that a court would rule that a minor's ability to make decisions that are likely to cause irreversible physiological damage is constitutionally protected. Let's be clear about what we are talking about here. This modest bill would create a civil remedy for young people who regret their decisions to undergo procedures that can result in disease, loss of organs, and permanent sterility. The single most compassionate thing our society can do for children who are struggling is to encourage them to accept themselves exactly as they are.
We follow well-established standards of care. This includes policies set forth by insurance companies and national recognized medical organizations. With these guidelines in place for treatment, we believe this legislation would be an overreach and governmental intrusion into the exam room between parents, their families, and providers. At Sanford, we feel that healthcare decisions are private and personal matters, not the business of the government.
Healthcare is not an ideology, but the evaluation and treatment of medical conditions using the best current evidence-based approaches. Gender dysphoria is such a complex medical condition requiring a multidisciplinary, evidence-based approach for successful treatment.
Dangerously interferes with the patient-physician relationship. Our members strongly oppose any governmental interference that causes a physician to compromise his or her medical judgment about what information or treatment is in the best interest of the patient. Governmental interference with the ability of physicians to have open, honest, and confidential communications with their patients is a dangerous precedent. House Bill 1057 would run afoul of the bedrocks of the patient-physician relationship, as adolescents and their families often present to a gynecologist to discuss confidential issues with them. If this legislation is passed, it will only serve to drive a wedge between patients and their physicians at a time when they need the support and counsel of their healthcare provider the most.
Our civil liberties come under fire by government officials when laws are used as weapons to prohibit the movement and prosperity of my people. The bills being proposed in here to restrict our transgender relatives from receiving medications needed to become who they are is not only unconstitutional, but it goes against who we are as a people, as a nation. I feel that if we enact laws that limit one's ability to rightfully become who they truly are on the inside, then we are no longer human beings. Laws are to be enacted to protect the rights and freedom of the people, to protect life and property. Regardless of age, one knows inside who they truly are. And to put an age requirement on a free person to rightfully become who they are is and will be detrimental to the health and general welfare of the Oyate. Every day our young people fight to live, to be who they are, and every day there are people in this world who tell them that they are wrong or they can't achieve what they desire in life and prevent them from living to their full potential.
We are concerned about the inadvertent economic consequences this bill may bring to South Dakota, which we are afraid is similar to what North Carolina did. Here is that list. PayPal was going to locate in North Carolina, canceled that expansion. The NBA pulled the All-Star game. The NCAA and ACC canceled championship game. Deutsche Bank canceled an expansion. Several concerts and conventions were canceled. This money will never go to North Carolina. The proponents have suggested that the increased sales tax in North Carolina and their growing GDP is an answer that says that this didn't matter. You don't get this money back. That's like arguing cutting the arm off a teenager doesn't count because they got taller. These inadvertent economic consequences are already being discussed in South Dakota. We have members that are large employers that have called and said They want to support states that are inclusive. Their employment practices are inclusive.
Cannot be two-spirit. And this bill will cause more of my children to harm themselves. They will be the ones who will suffer. I work with children who are depressed, and despite what the proponents have said today, children who are transgendered in this country and in many countries around the world, but in this state, are terrified. And they are harming themselves.
This is my middle child, Quincy. When I testified before the House Committee a few weeks ago, I was nervous. Today, I'm just heartbroken. I am heartbroken because I allowed that committee into my personal life. I told them the burden that this bill places on myself and my child and others like us, but they didn't listen. Quinn has been diagnosed with gender dysphoria and identifies as non-binary. After years of increasing anxiety and depression, Quinn began having suicidal thoughts. We immediately sought medical help and thus began our long journey. It was months of appointments with multiple doctors before Quinn was diagnosed. I am also heartbroken because I know legislation like this, amended or not, makes my child and others like them feel attacked.
Dysphoria is a very difficult thing to describe. When you're a kid, you hardly notice it, but it grows with you. Eventually, you will realize that not everyone has this suffocating darkness wrapped around their chest. You think, am I alone? Am I fighting a battle I'm fated to lose? This demon grows like an infection. Eventually, it will corrupt everything you see, and you will think that everything you are is wrong. When you learn that there are others like you and ways to fight this darkness, it gives you hope. But you will learn that the world you share with others is not a paradise. Children like you live in constant danger. Some of the people who are meant to protect you say that the monster staring back at you from the mirror is just your reflection. How can they miss the black thorns behind your eyes? How can they miss the gnarled roots in your heart? Why don't they understand that you are still alive under all this pain? I know that you cannot see this demon, but it is real. I know that I can fight it with my brothers, my sisters, my doctors, my parents, and my allies at my side. Please do not deny us the right to the life we want, the liberty from our demons, and the happiness that is just beyond our grasp.